The 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California. Less than 100 were made. My father spent 3 years restoring this car. It is his love, it is his passion.
It is his fault he didn't lock the garage.
Ferrari, one of the most prestigious auto manufacturers in the world. They made the 250 California as a road-going touring car version of their best racing cars of the time. Even in the 1950s, Ferrari was at the top of the world. But on the other side of it was Chevrolet. And they wanted a piece of that sweet, sweet sports car pedigree action. And their baby, the Corvette, was the car to get it. But could it really compete with the big boys over in Europe? Well, welcome to the first episode of Corvette vs. Ferrari, my new series that will find out exactly that. First up are the 1950s cars. We have this 1959 Ferrari 250 California convertible going up against the 1959 Chevrolet Corvette C1 convertible. Now, technically Corvette did have an earlier model starting in 1953, but it's far too slow to have competed with Ferraris at the time. And technically this 59 model is still a C1, and as it's the best Corvette offered in the 50s, I'm going with it. On the Ferrari side of things, I'm trying to forego the exclusive Ferraris and Ferrari race cars and instead go for the Ferraris average Joes would buy, much like those that would buy a Corvette. In fact, my grandfather owned a Corvette just like the one featured in this video, though I believe it was a 60s model. This specific Ferrari, which I believe was produced from 1956 to 1960, has a 3.0-liter V12 producing 262 horsepower and 188 pound-feet of torque. It weighs 2,315 pounds and is equipped with a 5-speed transmission. Pretty top-of-the-line stuff. On the contrary, Chevrolet gave the Corvette a huge 4.6-liter V8 with 290 horsepower and 290 pound-feet of torque. A beautiful balance there, and is equipped with a 4-speed. Better overall than the Ferrari, and actually really good for a 1950s American car. It was like nothing the Americans had ever seen at the time. Meanwhile, the car weighs 3,080 pounds, over 700 more than the Ferrari. This will be this car's biggest disadvantage. And now, onto the test. I'll be racing 5 laps with a warm-up lap since I'm quite rusty as I haven't turned many laps in the past few months. The test will be on Laguna Seca, my baby, as usual. Then, I'll put these cars onto the quarter mile. Let the testing begin. So, the Ferrari. Let's just say it's a far cry from their modern cars, or even the 250 GTO from the 60s, which I tested in an earlier video. It can definitely float around the racetrack better than the Corvette, and it's fun through the corners, but at high speeds it's ridiculously unstable. Perhaps it's my lack of skill, but I found it quite hard to control for a car of its type. I actually got some pretty fast laps in this car, and since I knew I could still go a lot faster by lap 6, I kept on running laps, until I hit the jackpot. Or I just got really lucky. Or is that the same thing? Who cares anyways? Here's my fastest lap with the Ferrari. So I made a pretty bad first turn with this car. Getting through the turns was definitely fun, but I wasn't exactly very good at it. This was the first car I tested, so I was a little bit more rusty, but I ran so many laps that I think the effect is negligible. The game was giving me perfect turns. Didn't feel like it, but it was giving me. Sliding through this turn there. The car definitely slid a lot. It just floated through the course. It wasn't very planted onto the ground like the Corvette ended up being. Through there, effortlessly. A little bit slower than I wanted to. I could probably have gone a little bit faster on this lap, honestly. It would have taken a lot of work, and I'd already put in a good bit at this point. The braking zone was very hard to judge for this turn with this car. I ended up going into the sand quite often. It still wasn't as bad as the Corvette. It was much lighter, but it was still really bad to judge where to brake. Float through this turn here. Not as fast as I probably could have. Gas through that turn. Really fun. And this turn with these cars, I don't know why. These two exact cars, this exact turn right here was the worst. It was really hard to get it just right. And there I got it pretty good. And that really is what made this lap as good as it ended up being. And there you go. 153.899. Now with the Corvette, I can't even put into words how much more stable this car felt. It was heavy, but still fast and still really good through the turns. But for a casual racer like me, it really felt a lot better. Tapping into the faster laps was really difficult at first, but eventually I got up there, and with a little practice I was getting laps comparable to the Ferrari. But the fastest lap was yet to come. And let's take a look. Perhaps it beats the Ferrari, or perhaps it doesn't. Either way, the boys at General Motors really outdid themselves with this car for the time. A really, really good car like nothing else that had ever came out of America. Alright, let's go. The fastest lap. Alright. This car actually goes really well through the turns. Really well. Dives in. You can just be on the throttle the whole way out. Very stable car, really. I just had to get used to it. It's a car that I feel like actually has a learning curve, unlike the Ferrari. That car is just, it's a blah. Dive into there. Not the other side. I feel like I could be a little more aggressive with this car. There's a little bit more room for that. The Ferrari, I just been out. Judging the braking distance here was even harder with the Corvette. The brakes were terrible. The car is heavy. It's just not the same. And for that little going into the sand, the lap time is invalidated by Forza. But that's part of racing, using as much of the track as possible. Turn here. Alright. The engine sound is top notch. Forza really hit the nail on those engine sounds for the V8s. And that last turn got pretty good, I believe. And boom, 153.884. I mean, personally, I'm a little bit on the fence about that whole going off the track thing. I did that a bit with the Ferrari as well. And Forza's a little bit picky with how it happens. Sometimes it's only if you get all four off, and sometimes if you get even the tiniest pixel of your car off the track, it'll do it. So I'm just taking the lap times as it is, and it was hard enough to get the Corvette up to this fast of a lap in the first place, so I'm taking what I can get, okay? I'll touch on this again later on in the video. So here we have our best times and the times leading up to those. I did try to get both cars even faster, but after about 3 or 4 laps each, I just gave up. I had hit the jackpot with both with a lucky lap that was under 1 minute 54, and the Corvette just happened to be a little bit luckier. I'm debating giving the win to the Corvette at this point, but I'm saving the entirety of this challenge for the drag racing challenge on the quarter mile. So far, things are looking up for the car built in a shed in Texas. Let's go on to that drag racing challenge, shall we? So for this challenge, I ran the Corvette first, and I had to warm up to the drag racing again, with a few red light foul. But eventually I was flying out of the gates the millisecond in turn grid, and I was setting some really fast times. I ran the Corvette until I got a really fast time of 14.214, which I later tried to beat, but couldn't. Next up is the Ferrari. Let's see how this thing does. Yeah, as you can see, it beats the Corvette on the first try. After this, I just gave it to the Ferrari. Now here are the drag racing times. And while you look at that, let me just say, I really don't know who the overall victory should go to, as the Corvette stuck with the Ferrari the whole way on the road course and won out by a very small margin, while the drag race was a clear victory for the Ferrari. Honestly, giving it to the Corvette is kind of a disservice to all the hand-built work that was put into the Ferrari and the heritage of that car. But it's also a disservice to the Corvette and the General Motors people who also largely hand-built their cars and put even more work into a field and into a car market that they largely didn't really understand or had never broken into before. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do something a lot of people might like, but a lot of people also probably won't like. I'm going to call it a draw for the 1950s. We'll have to see who has the tiebreaker when we arrive in the 60s. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there on the next episode of Corvette vs. Ferrari.